Welcome to The Key, where we discuss ways to unlock efficiencies for your teams on the road. My name is Corey Noyak, Vice President of Finance and Operations at CarData. This is the podcast that dives into the strategy behind company mobility benefit programs. This is the ultimate podcast for cross-functional thought leaders working to optimize efficiency and ensure a modern approach to field team enablement. Keep employees happy, streamline costs, spearhead company growth. That's the key. Buckle in. Today, we are going to be discussing the use of AI in the finance world and how to leverage AI effectively and safely to help streamline financial processes. We will highlight the importance of harnessing technologies to improve processes, implement finance operations, and lead transformative change. Today, I am joined by Glenn Hopper. Glenn is at the forefront of integrating AI into the finance sector, leading innovation solutions that drive efficiency and accuracy. As head of AI research and development at Eventus, he specializes in developing AI-driven tools for finance and accounting. With over 20 years of experience as CFO for private equity-backed companies, Glenn has a deep focus on finance automation, operational efficiencies, and M&A. He is also a lecturer and author, focusing on the intersection of AI and corporate finance with a passion for leveraging technologies to transform financial operations and help businesses scale. Glenn's new book, AI Mastery for Finance Professionals, is out now. Glenn, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's jump right in. To start off with, could you tell us a bit about your journey from CFO to AI advocate for finance professionals and what motivated you to this shift?
Yeah, first off, thank you for having me. Glad to be here, and talking about my favorite topic, AI. So my shift. So I'm sort of living in two worlds right now because I still have some clients where I'm working as a fractional CFO right now. I was spent 15 years as a CFO for private equity backed smaller companies, and I guess what started early on my shift towards AI was really about data and analytics and reporting for private equity people who love to beat you up on your numbers, and they always want, better forecasts and more detail and more detail. So I think early on from my first CFO role, I knew, okay, I don't have a huge team. I came out of telecom in my roles prior to CFO, so I was used to having a lot of data, having a lot of reports, having a lot of KPIs, and being able to get real-time access. When I moved into my first CFO role, it was in retail, it was brick and mortar. We didn't have a lot of data, it was very few locations. But I knew the investors and the kind of reporting they wanted, and I knew the kind of reporting I could get before. So the way that I could get there was by getting data from not just from our general ledger, but from our point of sale systems, from external sources, and trying to predict retail volume for a startup retail business was not easy. So trying to use as much macroeconomic data as I could. So as I started gathering more data and finding more ways to automate, it's data and automation are kind of linked together. So once you have information flowing from one system to another, you start to get more of a whole picture of customers. So for me, it was really, I'm getting more and more data. I'm getting more sophisticated with how to use it. And then in the 2010s, when machine learning started to become more accessible and more workable, as I expanded out my reports, I moved from just doing stuff in from doing stuff in Microsoft Excel to doing stuff in R and then Python, and trying to build better forecasts. And as I evolved and as machine learning became more powerful, I started to lean on it more and more and more, and really see that was a way. So my role as a CFO when I came into companies would be to bring them, to either get them ready for acquisition or to help bring funding, whether it's debt or equity, or a couple of turnarounds there. But we found early on that we're going to have the best success with data and analytics and being able to really drill in on the numbers. So it's all tied together. So I guess when I really started making a shift was when I went from just using AI machine learning in my day job to I wrote my first book on it in 2021. At the time, very niche book that really a lot of people were not paying attention to, because in the finance world, not a lot of people were talking about machine learning in 2021. Of course, generative AI comes along, and now everybody's talking about it. So I thought, oh, I need to get another book out and talk more about this. But really, it's a quest for, having seen what becoming a data-driven organization can do, how can we get this automation? And AI, like, I don't, I'm a huge evangelist for AI, but I don't think it's a panacea. I don't think you're not just going to wave the magic AI wand and fix all the problems. That a company that doesn't have good data maturity or a good data foundation, they're not going to be able to just jump into AI. So I feel like I've kind of grown with the the compute power and the amount of data that's out there, and my career and shift has really ridden that data wave. So really long answer. I hope that yeah.
Well, it sounds like you were almost an early adopter, that you leaned into AI when others would have maybe shied away and said, oh, no, that's down in the future. And so, we'll call that an early adopter, you've been able to integrate AI into your day to day and now, again, share that knowledge with other folks. But I guess also on that is, how has the role of a finance leader evolved? Because you have a unique instance that you were able to ingest and really become more using Python and things like that. But for the traditional finance leader, do they have the opportunity to lean in and jump in and do that? Or with the rise of AI and other advanced technologies, how should they evolve their role?
Yeah, so I'm dating myself a bit here, but I've watched the evolution of the CFO's office from really controllers to today are what CFOs used to be, and the controllers, it's very important. You can't do any of this if you don't have good accounting and you don't have a good controller. So you have to start with the fundamentals. You have to have your chart of accounts, your GL data has to be super clean. But then I think years ago you could get away with saying, you could be in this ivory tower of finance and accounting and say, I don't care what the widgets are. These are the numbers. I'm reporting this. This is where my domain expertise is. And this is what I do. I don't know what's going on in sales and what's going on in operations. And what's happened is, as data has moved across companies and as it's become more and more linked, what I've seen, maybe this isn't always the case, but I think there is more and more of a shift to it. If if the CFO's office is the arbiter of the truth for the finance numbers, can't they also be sort of the official external observer of other numbers in the companies too, tracking all KPIs? And I want to be careful about saying external observer, because something has happened too, where at first I made this mistake early in my career where I wanted to get data from other departments and I wanted to be the owner of it and report it. I didn't take the right approach with business partnering. And I think what you're seeing now is, as more of the sort of data entry tasks and the lower level tasks of finance and accounting, as that gets automated, you're seeing the CFO's office move from this sort of idea of a cost center, maybe a backward looking, maybe, just we have our forecast, but people are ignoring us because sales is going to do their own forecast and operations has their own approach. So what we're really seeing is, because of the pervasiveness of data and companies that really have it together, you're seeing the CFO's office and finance in general partner with the other groups. And so if sales and marketing wants to do something, or if operations wants to do something, the CFOs used to be the CF no. And I can just think of the first CFOs that I dealt with, and you'd come to them, you'd want to make a change, and the first thing they would say was, is it in the budget? Nope. Well, then you're not going to do this. So, but really, and if you change that mindset and you say, I am your partner here, you want to do something, we're missing our forecast or whatever, or we have a great idea, we didn't budget for it, but let's prove it in. Let's do an ROI. Let's work together to make this happen, and to explain, sort of the gap accounting and revenue recognition and all the issues across the group. So it's really become a lot more strategic and a lot more partner based and a lot more. You can't just be in that ivory tower finance. You have to know the rest of the business now. So I think that's only going to broaden even more as AI and technology proliferates.
I love that. And I definitely do agree that, as you're saying, I'm hearing words and kind of envisioning that we used to be more of this repository or compilation, and it stopped there. You either gave me a lot of information, we went over there, or we branched out. And as you're saying that, now CFOs and finance individuals need to be more of those drivers and driving decisions. and that they can use AI to really propel themselves to do it. So before we get too in the weeds of AI and everything we can do with it, I do want to define it, because AI can really feel like a buzzword sometimes, especially for finance professionals. So how do you define AI in practical finance specific context?
Yeah. Great question, and very important, especially for a finance audience or for someone who's not a geek like I am, who likes staring at a blinking cursor and looking under the hood of all this stuff. So let's talk about AI first in two different paths. So there's what I will call classical AI, which will be the machine learning algorithms that we've been using for 15 years now. That are, algorithms are programs that learn from data. So we use it for clustering, we use it for prediction, we use it for classification. It is deterministic. It is, it's just math, and you can train these models on data, and you can get output that makes sense and it's based on historical data. And that's what sort of the classical approach to AI has been. The reason everybody's talking about, and probably the reason I'm on the podcast now, everybody's talking about generative AI, because it's super accessible and it's really cool and it's got a lot of potential, but it is also non-deterministic. And this is why for finance people, you need to be very careful with it. I think it has great potential. So we've been talking about democratization of data for years. What generative AI opens up is democratization of data science. And the reason I say that is, whether it's Microsoft Copilot, it's not there yet. And I'm not shilling for one software over another, but I think this is, where we see the future going. But all the things that we used to pride ourselves on as finance geeks, like our nested if statements and our Power Query and all the stuff that we used to do in Excel that would differentiate us. Well, in the very near future, people are going to be able, through generative AI, instead of knowing how to write, sum ifs and whatever they were doing in Excel, they're going to write in natural language. Here's my data. This is what I want to do. And it's all going to happen under the hood. And that's all because of generative AI. So, I mean, we can get, if we can get down into the weeds of how generative AI is different than classical AI. And I guess the super quick way to say it is, generative AI is trained on data, but it's creating novel and new content. Whereas classical AI is creating output based on these algorithms, based on the patterns in the data. So there's a subtle difference, but I'm a lot more comfortable using, classical machine learning for financial reporting than I am with generative AI. Now, there's ways around that too, and maybe we'll touch on some of those later. But so I don't. Is that a good definition right there to just talk about?
Yeah, that's a great definition. And I think it highlights for a lot of people that it's not as basic. It's not just AI. There is many facets to it in many different ways. And I'd like to double click on that from your perspective, between classic and the generative form, which do you think will be the bigger disruptor, or which one will also be easier to be adopted by finance individuals?
Yeah. So, I mean, and that's really, so I've been talking for the last year and maybe close to 2 years. I've been doing training and courses and public speaking, and of course the books and all that about AI to groups. And what I say is, like, generative AI is amazing because it is opening the door for people who are not programmers to be able to use these tools that you used to have to. The only way you could use them in the past is you've got to know Python, you've got to know coding, you've got to be able to um, work in that world. You've got to be a machine learning engineer or a data scientist or whatever. But now, with, the people will be able to access it. So the most disruptive is going to be generative AI. But what's going to happen is, you're going to talk to the AI like you do a smart employee. You're not going to know. From a finance point, we have to talk about this because explainable AI, XAI, is a very important thing. But if you can ask a question, and AI, once we kind of work out some kinks and get through some hallucinations and some of the early stage problems with it, it's going to go off and answer it and come back to you, and you may not know how that happened. Now, the reason I sort of paused on that, that's what's going to be revolutionary. But the reason I paused on that is, try telling an auditor that the number that you just gave them, that you just fed it into a black box, and you can't, you don't know how it happened. That's not going to fly. That's not going to work for your SEC filings and your audits and all that. So, but what will happen is, you're going to have people a lot more people able to access these tools. And there's a whole movement with explainable AI right now that is very important. And if you're certainly, if you're reporting public company financials or working with an audit or whatever, that is important. You can't, there are maybe models that are better predictors and better at some things, but if they're an artificial neural network or something that you can't explain or reproduce exactly how it happened, we're going to have to find simpler models to use. And there's a whole movement around that in finance. So, but generative AI is going to be what finally puts this in more people's hands. We just have to, but really it's going to be linking the two, because generative AI will give you access to those classical machine learning algorithms that will run the data the same way. We just won't have to learn Python to be able to do it.
Awesome. And in terms of a horizon and timeline, when do you think we'll be able to utilize some of this? Are there folks and instances where you're already seeing this in play?
Yeah, and I'm a terrible futurist. I'm because from day to day I'll waver between wildly optimistic, like we're gonna have AGI in 12 months, and if you cut that and just have me saying we're gonna have AGI in 12 months, I'll end up eating crow over that. But if you just cut out that one clip, but sometimes I told someone this morning, one of my relatives, I said I wouldn't be surprised if we had AGI in 5 years, but no one has that crystal ball. But I think for timelines, the way most businesses now, if you're an enterprise scale business and you've got your own data science team, your own machine learning team, you're already working on ways to integrate machine learning into the same data platforms that you've been using for years, and you're giving your employees tools, like PwC or some of these groups that have had big partnerships with OpenAI. They're putting the tools in people's hands. They're interacting with their data, so that's already happening. But I think for and maybe some mid-level enterprise or mid-level companies will get there too, but like SMB, which is a space I work mostly in, I think that for these businesses where they're going to the first exposure they have to it is going to be in their ERPs and their SaaS software that they're already using. These SaaS software providers are going to fix a lot of the concerns that people have around, they're going to put guardrails around it and give you ways to interact with your data in natural language. And that's already happening. I can talk specific companies, if we need to, but like whether it's a data analyst tool or a CRM or an ERP, they're starting to roll out some generative AI capabilities, and that's how most of us are going to see. And that's happening today. But and then there's bespoke stuff that people like me build that where we're going to take AI and integrate it with your through an API, so you can chat with your company's data and all that. And for the companies that can afford to build out those kind of applications, you'll start seeing that too. So I think it's there today. It's only going to grow, and I think it behooves the big frontier companies to make it easier to make this stuff even more accessible. So I think that we're only going to see adoption increase because these companies are going to find ways to get it into more people's hands to where it's actually integrated with your data.
For sure. And this revolution or evolution really reminds me of when everyone moved to cloud. When you used to say, you're moving ERPs from desktop to cloud, everyone said, no way. We always wanted on-prem and everything like that. So I did want to get your timelines. Just it's always fun trying to see a crystal ball and when things will happen. But that is one of the trends. And really for our listeners, especially, it's how do I make this actually apply to my business? And so what can I start doing today? Because even with the cloud ERP system, these things take time, and to invest a full way adoption, it's really hard to do. So are there tools available now or technologies that are currently available that can be very impactful that finance teams, especially in the SMB space, that can already start adopting?
Yeah, there are, and this is so. I'm not a CISO, but this is where data security and privacy come in. And right now, so I teach courses on how you can analyze financial statements using OpenAI, and I've done the other ones too. But and again, I'm going to go ahead and say here, OpenAI is what I use most consistently. ChatGPT is what I use most consistently because their data analyst tool is made for this stuff. It is almost bulletproof. Claude from Anthropic has a tool that does something similar. Claude is getting overwhelmed right now. It's down a lot. Gemini has been a nightmare. Gemini never works. Llama is pretty interesting. And if we have time later, we can talk about some of the smaller Llama models. that as a way that you can address data privacy concerns because you can run them locally versus the cloud-based. But so right now, what people can do is, first off, they have to be aware, and this is the caveat that I throw out there. If you are not on an enterprise or team level of ChatGPT, or if you're, an Anthropic and Claude, you can turn it off. Every LLM has different default settings, but if you don't reach whatever level, where you have to get to the level where it says your data will not be used to train our models, because if you don't get to that level, anything you put in there, I tell people, do not put proprietary business information, don't put PII. It's very important not to do that. But what you can do right now, it's a little disruptive because you have to come out of your normal workflow. But I've done scenario analysis, I've done Monte Carlo simulations, risk assessment, budgeting and forecasting using more complex models. So you can come out of your normal workflow as long as I'm in an enterprise account with OpenAI, so able to know that I'm working in my own environment and the data is not being used for training. But you can do some really cool things. You just have to have a base level of training and understanding on it, because you need to know when you can trust the data, when you have to double check it, and what you can and how you can use it. And also you have to know, if you're going to be going into ChatGPT and doing this analysis, you need to be able to package it up and take it with you, because you're not going to go into the boardroom and open up your ChatGPT conversation and talk about the charts that you had there. So you've got to be able to kind of zip it up and bring it with you, and then bring it back for another conversation. So it's a little clunky, but when you learn kind of these tricks, you can, forecasting is one of my favorite things to do, and just running different scenario analysis, because you can do it so quickly and run all these different models. So you can do that right now. It takes some training, and I know we're maybe going to talk about some reskilling and upskilling of employees. But yeah, I don't know. That's the main example and primary use case I can see today.
Well, I was gonna say, so we are gonna get into the privacy later, because that obviously
Yeah,
is a hot topic. And one of the questions later as well is, from a skill, what do we need to know? But you did touch on, and it's very cool because the capabilities of these systems are pretty endless, and we're at the beginning of the life cycle. So what they will be able to do is even
yeah.
going to be even more vast. But you mentioned even forecasting, or if there's another example, how can, what would be a low hanging fruit, or at least something that we can, as you said, step out of our normal process and supplement with AI right now? Walk us through quickly just an example of how, yeah, ChatGPT could help us, if the
Yeah.
example you'd like is forecasting, but just for everyone and our listeners to understand that low hanging fruit, or at least why not try it? It's out of your system and
Yep.
can really help you on day to day.
So this is an easy one that everybody can do with no worry. So first off, go to Yahoo Finance or Google Finance or whatever, pick your favorite public company, download 3 years of financial statements. And there's some data cleanup you can do, and that's more for like a tutorial, but just um, basically you download the financial statement, save them as a CSV. Um, you can't put multi-tab items into ChatGPT or whatever, but so you just have one tab's your income statement, one's your balance sheet, one's your cash flow statement or whatever, and you upload that, verify that ChatGPT, and you use data analyst in ChatGPT. But here's where generative AI is really going to stand out. So we think about software like Excel, where it's a very, you push this button, you pull this lever, and this is what you get. But what if you just start asking generative AI to analyze the financial statements and give it like intentionally vague requests out of the gate? Like, don't say run a DuPont analysis. Don't say give me these key financial ratios. Don't tell it anything. You just say, hey, this is Apple's financial statements from the last 3 years. Run an analysis. Tell me what you think about the company. And this is where you'll get something really interesting out of generative AI, because anyone who's analyzed financial statements for a period of time, you've got your sort of key things that you look at. You go to your income statement and you want to see, your gross margin and your net income, your EBITDA, whatever it is you look at. Maybe you look at the R&D expense compared to, or your inventory, whatever it is that you typically look at. But the interesting thing with generative AI is it can break that pattern. It's like having a coworker go look at it. So sometimes, because computers are better at identifying patterns than we are, sometimes it'll identify stuff that we wouldn't think of, or find a correlation between two accounts that we didn't think of, and just if you are vague and you treat it as someone that you're bouncing ideas off of, you can get some pretty impressive responses, and then you sort of do you fall into this back and forth, just like you would if you're in programming. There's like partner programming where someone's looking over someone's shoulder or whatever. But imagine every time you're doing a financial statement analysis, just having a sparring partner or someone that you're doing it with, and then just start asking it questions and say, well, do you notice anything unique about this? Why do you think this? And as you work through these conversations and as it gets more data and you start getting input, you start to come up with instead of just doing this financial analysis on your own, you start to have a real sense of something that you've kind of talked through with a working partner. And then when you start wanting to forecast from there, it's in the context window of that conversation. It's got all this history of the company. So you can talk about, well, here's some macroeconomic events. What do you think would happen to our international or to our sales if tariffs were put in place or whatever, and just having it come up with ideas. It doesn't mean they're going to be right, but if you had an employee, it's not like all their employees are right either. They may predict sales would drop by 50%. You say, well, let's figure out a better number than that. But it's just, so this is something anyone can do right now with public company financial data. And I think that for what people need to do right now is just see the power of it, understand how it works, and then ideas will start clicking of ways that you can use it with your own company data.
I like that a lot, and that's an easy way for someone to start getting comfortable and see how they can apply it to their day-to-day. Even sitting here, like, I definitely want to go try that after. It sounds pretty fun, to be honest. But it does raise another question, because to use these tools, you need some form of understanding, some form of skill. So as a finance individual, what would you recommend is the level of competency that's needed with using AI tools? And then as a second is, what's the level that you need from a team or someone else using it? And how does AI really reflect on how you build out the team after that?
Yeah, so to me, because I've been talking a lot to companies about this, and most companies right now that I work with are very scared. They have this FOMO of not doing it, but they're also very scared of, I'm not just going to turn everything over to the robots. So they're trying to find this middle ground. And I how I coach most companies at this point is, look, depending on the size of your team, you need one or two real champions. These are the people who are gung ho, who maybe there's a couple of financial analysts on your team who can write SQL queries and have done a little bit of coding, and maybe they're excited to try like Python and Excel, and it's kind of the tech forward people who are understand this a little more, and you take them and you want to train them up on data science, on analytics, and give them an idea of beyond just the financial analyst expertise, so that they understand it, and then let them sort of proliferate, almost to train the trainer, but let them proliferate their knowledge, because they're going to be the real champions and they're going to be pushing the envelope. But the interesting thing with generative AI right now is it's not going to be deployed the way we deploy a new ERP or a new project management system. It's not, okay, this is the software, we're going to give training, this is how everybody uses it. It's going to be, let me give access to the employees to the software, put the guardrails in place so that they're not uploading stuff that they shouldn't be, and that they're not relying on data that they shouldn't be. But then once you have the policy and the guardrails in place for them, then you encourage everyone to use it, and you encourage them to share what they learn, because what the companies that have gone early and are having success with it are the ones that put it in their employees' hands and let them go figure out ways. Because people, there's that quote that it's often misattributed to Steve Jobs, but I don't remember who said it originally, but it wasn't him. It was, if you want to find the most efficient way to do a job, give it to a lazy person. And I'm not saying everyone who uses generative AI is lazy, but the best way to find an efficient way to do something is not by me as the senior manager or director or CFO telling my team how to use it. It is by putting it in their hands, and then they're the expert at what they're doing. They'll figure out the most efficient way to do it. And then, so it's going to be, it's more democratization. It's not a top-down thing. You give them the basic training and the access, and they're going to find ways to make your team more efficient. So that's kind of the best deployment that we're seeing. And for those people, for everyone else who's not a champion, you do want to show them, you want them to understand, look, LLMs on their own are not good at math. You don't want to rely on an LLM to do math on its own, but a tool like Data Analyst or Code Interpreter or Anthropic's new tool, where it's actually writing code under the hood to come up with math. Well, computer code is for math and it is deterministic. So, like, if here's an example: if you ask an LLM to give you um, an amortization table. It will give you something that looks a lot like an amortization table, but it's not doing any math. So it's basically taking amortization tables it's seen before, and it's not quite a random number generator, but I guarantee you that that amortization table, a 30-year am or whatever, is not going to be right on. You'll be lucky to find one or two cells that are right in it. So, but if it goes and writes code, yeah. But if it goes and writes code to do it, then I mean, still, we're still at trust but verify. But, it's that kind of thing. People need to know what kind of questions you can ask it, what to look for, and how to phrase it, and which tools to use to get the right answers.
Nice. It's very interesting because, as you said, having the right policies in place and letting people really dive in and play with these tools and learn. But also, what I'm hearing as well, which you touched on, and even your evolution and the path and journey that you've gone on, it's really getting those CFOs moving out into being operators and drivers. And then a lot of the accounting side of things moving into more data, like you mentioned, the data analyst and getting more ingrained in the data. So it's very interesting how everything's evolving and changing from what we used to do as a day to day. So now I think let's dive into the topic that's always the other hot topic when you talk about AI, and really, as you mentioned a little bit before, around data security, data privacy, and then another topic which in that realm as well, also IP ownership. So three big areas, but I'll let you kind of go through them each and really walk us through some of the challenges and mitigating factors and what companies should be really aware of when dealing with AI.
Yeah. So okay. So this is not something that I would tell a client, and I do when I'm working with client data. It is we're going to make sure it's protected. But it's an interesting there's an interesting distinction that I want to lead off with here. So large language models, when they're trained, they don't learn facts; they learn probabilities. So um, if I type in the prompt, if I type Michael Jordan is a blank, well, an LLM that's been trained on, basically think of it as reading the whole internet. There's going to be tens of thousands, hundreds of, I don't know how many times Michael Jordan is going to be referenced in an article or something that the LLM would have been trained on. So it is, when it is completing that Michael Jordan is it's not going and searching Wikipedia, and it's not looking in like a long-term memory of who Michael Jordan is. It's actually picking the next most likely, statistically likely word in or group of words in order in that context. So if I even I'm not doing this and I'm not advising anyone to do this, but if I go to an open, large language model and I type Glenn Hopper's social security number is blank, 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 the chances that that's going to like proliferate through some kind of training and come out, I mean, it's it's not, I mean, it's non-zero, but the chances that that anything's actually going to happen, because it's not, the data itself is not being learned. Now, if 100,000, 200,000 people were putting my social security number out there, or, there were that many data points that had it, then probability wise, then yes, it would have a much better chance of turning up. So I mean, it would have to be, it's needle in haystack doesn't even, it's a needle in a haystack in the middle of a vast cosmos kind of thing. So that said, that's not me green lighting people to go upload their PII into these large language models, but it is, we need to think about, it's basically, you mentioned when moving to the cloud earlier, and all these security concerns that people had about going to the cloud, like, oh no, my data is much more secure either on my work desktop computer, or maybe we have our own data center and we've got our own server rooms or whatever. And what I've always been kind of tech forward, and I remember, and even, cloud was more expensive than on-prem hosting. But I remember having this conversation with CTOs at companies and with the management team of, do you think that we're going to be better at data security than AWS? Do you think we're going to be better at data security than Google Cloud? And if you think about how much of our data is online now, unless you're in like a Faraday cage, or you're completely isolated from any network anywhere, data is out there. So I think about all the SaaS tools that we use, all the online software that we use, and there are the security measures in place that SOC 2 compliance, and whatever, pick your whatever qualifications that you need to check off for data security. Um, but there are, someone that worked at Google could get in, maliciously get into my Gmail and read my Gmail if they, had reason to, or Russian hackers could break in and get my cloud information. But there's no more risk inherently with training these, with the way that OpenAI or Google, again with Gemini, or Anthropic, the way they're handling your data, than any other cloud provider out there, except for that if it leaks into the training data. Or there's one thing to think about is when you interact with these tools. I know OpenAI does. I don't know how much the other companies do, but they keep memories of who you are, and it'll lock into certain pieces. So if you put in some information, if you put in your medical records, it may remember that you have angina or something. Something that you wouldn't want out there. So whatever you put out there, it's just like anything else you put on the web. It's like uh, if I'm doing a lot of Google searches on heart disease, and I'm trying to, asking these specific questions, well, Google will start, my algorithm starts getting changed. My YouTube algorithm starts getting changed based on what I'm searching for. So it's sort of that same kind of that digital slug trail that you have everywhere. But I really, when I'm dealing with company data, there are, as much as you can keep things isolated, I'd say at a minimum, if we're using company information, we need team accounts from OpenAI, which are, I think they're like $30 a user per month. So that's probably the most affordable way to get in there. I think Anthropic, you can turn off. I don't know about on the free, but you can turn off the data used to train the models. But I think we, like at my company, our policy is we delete recorded meetings every 60 days or whatever, whatever the thing is. So you have to have a security stance to keep this data, treat this data just like you would any other information of how you're handling it. We, like, also at my company, we don't, even if a client uses Google Sheets, we don't use that. We keep everything within our environment, and don't put stuff out in the cloud that way. So I, there's not a clear black and white, and this is, I certainly have to talk about it because I'm talking about using your data in AI, but this is not my expertise area, other than just common sense for all of us, the way we treat data that we put online.
So it sounds like listeners here should not be too concerned with using from a security perspective. And it is much like things have in the past of just making sure it's new. And then as long as a policy from a company perspective is established, that should give enough coverage and comfort that there isn't a material risk, but really setting those controls. And that is where my next question really is where does it lie? Because now it's bridging a line as well that, we were talking from finance and putting some information in, but now maybe there's an HR item of it, of who really should be responsible for now setting those guidelines, setting those policies now, because us as finance individuals are using more confidential information. So what would you recommend in terms of the process to deploy this, and now which teams to really bring in and cross collaborate and everything from that nature?
Yeah, and I think so. If you're at a larger company and you've got a CIO and you've got the security group, I mean, that's the ideal situation. But again, most companies are in that SMB space. Most companies in the world are in that space. So, and they don't have that level of expertise. And you know, I, as someone who's spent my career in finance, like I I know some about security, and I know, sort of the basic sort of common sense, but I wouldn't advocate for finance being the final decision maker in that. We're a seat at the table, but sometimes HR, rolls up through the CFO's office too, but HR is a seat at the table. And then I think it's for the company deciding, okay, these are the, you know, types of data that we have. This, maybe you put less of a premium on your sales and marketing plan or copywriting or whatever, and it's so we can use this here, but this is our HR data. And maybe you say, you know what, this is PII, it's too risky, we're not putting this anywhere except our HR system. We're not putting socials, people's pay rates and salaries and all that, we're not putting it out there. But I think this is one that requires a collaborative nature from each department saying what they're comfortable, what their comfort level is, but you also need that domain expert in security that is telling them this is what, these are explaining those risks to people. Because, we've all been around the internet for our entire careers, but we don't understand, exactly what the exposures are or why. And maybe that's not our role, but we do need to have a combined, across all departments determination around that. I don't know. I hope that's clear enough of an answer, but it's a tough one. Yeah.
I like that a lot. And it goes to, again, of that evolution, coming back to just the role of the finance individual, because, traditionally this is, okay, we're just doing an Excel. They'll leave us alone. We're the repository. We'll take some information. But as you said, we should be bringing in other folks. This is going to branch further, and having those discussions and deciding how we can impact even further is going to help us propel. So that's awesome.
Yeah. And I think
Is
about,
there any, sorry.
no, I think about the way we use data now, and the way there's so much of it, and the way things are emailed around. And I don't, if you're uh, emailing spreadsheets within the company, but then, somehow we're going to send this to our partner or whatever. And the data, it's very hard to keep up with it. And I think about how many companies, do you have a clear data privacy policy on what can be sent where and all that? And this just adds to it, right?
What would you recommend though? Because, and again, back to really the buzzword and big words of AI and the fear that could come with it, but how do we bring this back down and make this more applicable so that folks listening, exactly with the data modeling and going on to Google and pulling the spreadsheets, how can we get comfortable, and how do we kind of, as a silver lining of we know that we can do this and it's okay.
Yeah, so really, the ideal situation to me is either you're on like an OpenAI enterprise or team account, or like in Microsoft, if you're in your own Azure environment. I've seen a lot of really good deployments that are just this, but it's cloud, but you're in your sort of own virtual cloud, whether you're in your own hosted environment, everything's running right there, and it's not even going up. It's all staying in that walled off area, and so that's the areas where there's the most comfort. And then I mentioned this earlier, and I want to say it again, because there are companies that are going to have really locked down data controls, and they may say we don't put anything in the cloud, or what, maybe they have their own data center, or they have their own rules around it. And I think they're not quite there yet. So all these big models that are out there, the ones I've been talking about, are powerful because of their size. But there's these small language, so there's large language models, but there's also the smaller models. And Llama is one that's interesting because they've got I don't know what their sizes are now, but they've got like an 8 billion parameter model and maybe a 15 billion parameter model. And these can run on high-end desktops or servers. So your data can be completely, whatever you're doing with those, doesn't have to leave your premises. So those are kind of interesting, but they don't have the power yet that these big models do. And they'll never be as powerful, as the massive ones. But I think that we're going to find companies are going to start figuring out, like we were talking about different data being treated differently. Like, these things, maybe it's okay because we're in this environment, but this data is really locked down. So maybe HR, it's like, well, you can use it in this environment because it's in our controlled, removed from the internet access point or whatever. And that's just something to think about as another option out there. And it's, but for people to be comfortable today, I think, be sure you check the privacy settings, and just it's even if you're, I mean, so if you're an individual, maybe that, like the ChatGPT Plus account, I don't know, it's 20 or $25 a month. I think you can turn off training in that. That's something to think about. If you're a company, at a minimum, the Teams or whatever Anthropic's version is, just go to the settings, make sure it's not used to train, and then know, you can delete message history, because in that mess, and you can, if you are using OpenAI, I think that they're the only ones I'm thinking of that have this memory feature, but you can turn off, don't remember anything about me, if you don't want it to, keep this historical background. But it's like Google, right? You give up some level of data privacy for more of a customized experience. And with these LLMs, they're like, well, if they know you a little better, they're going to answer your questions a little better, but also that means it has more data about you. So everybody kind of has to find that comfort level individually, or not individually, yes, for individuals, but at a company, ideally the company is putting guardrails in place and saying and telling the employees what they can use.
Nice. And so it sounds like there's lots of opportunity for individuals to apply this to the business, but remembering the configuration needs to be based on the company's needs and policies. And as you said, those guardrails are equally, if not more important to before you start this adventure. Nice. Well, I think everything that we've said so far has been awesome. I think we've given a lot of information to many finance individuals and across the board in other departments of how to really bring AI into their business. I wanted to touch on a few closing thoughts and really get a high level from, if there was just one takeaway that you would like finance professionals to remember about AI, what would it be?
I think it's really, I mean, I'm not saying go out on the bleeding edge and throw all your proprietary information into these models, and just cede control to the robots. I will say this technology, and I've been around, I'm old, I've been around a long time. This technology is moving faster than any in my career, and probably in my lifetime. And this, AI is, even if even if AI gets no better than it is today, that we're going to be using it for years and finding new ways to use it. I think that we have to overlook. So there's the fear of missing out, so we don't want to miss it. And then there's sort of the not knowing how to use it. And then there's also the fear of, is this going to take my job? I don't understand how it works. I'm not going to look at it. We have to overcome those fears. And we have to say, um, first off, our employees, if we're not letting them use it, they're going to get frustrated because they're going to be using it in their personal lives. And they're going to also get stagnant in their job skills. The forward looking and forward leaning companies are finding ways to use this right now. It's We can't just bury our head in the sand. We have to find, even if it's just dipping a toe in the water, we have to find a way in companies to use this. And we can start small with low risk projects and then kind of build on them. But we need to get them in the employees' hands, train them, give them what they need, figure out ways that we can become more efficient, because it's going to be like if we ignored, that move from desktop to the cloud, or all these other technological evolutions. If we ignore this, we're going to get left behind. And I guess the other part of that, we've been talking about digital transformation. We've been talking about that since the 90s. And I think people get really tired of hearing it because they think, well, didn't we already do this? But I think what we're seeing right now is this is sort of the last call for, if you haven't gotten your data house in order at your company, you do it now, because you're not going to be able to use any of this AI stuff if you don't have your data house in order. So it's really data, 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 and start dipping a toe in the water and figuring out how to use this.
That's great advice. And then really, so you are an expert on the field. You have a lot of knowledge. So really, for our listeners, I just want to help Sharon. Where can they listen or follow your work? And also, you obviously have a new book out. So we want to hear a little bit about the book as well.
Sure, sure. I appreciate that. So the only social media I'm on is LinkedIn, but I'm pretty active on there. Um, I host a couple of podcasts on finance and AI. I've got some courses on LinkedIn Learning, for the Corporate Finance Institute, for Section School, AI CPA. I'm speaking at an AI CPA conference here in December coming up. And yeah, yeah, Corporate Finance Institute is probably where most of my courses are, but I'm always putting out new material. And the new book, I you know, this is be the worst sales pitch you've ever heard, but this is what I'll say: the book is not for everyone because it goes deep. It's not just about this is how you use ChatGPT. It is the fundamentals of this is what machine learning is. These are the types of algorithms we use. These are the applications in finance. It's a book. It's the book I wanted to write a few years ago, but the publisher told me nobody wants to read this stuff because it's a textbook, and they wanted it to be more of a memoir. But I'm really passionate, and this is not me just being pedantic. I think that the way to stand out, not just in finance and accounting, but in all fields, is if you really understand at a fundamental level, and this isn't saying you have to go learn coding or anything like that, but if you just understand how these models work, you're going to be that much better at it. And as if we are looking at a situation where, uh, and this opens up a whole other can of worms, but if AI does end up taking people's jobs by understanding, by being the expert in AI, I feel like you're extending your shelf life a little bit. Not to put extra fear into the audience, because I know people have nerves around it now. So my latest book, it's called AI Mastery for Finance Professionals. It's on Amazon and wherever your favorite bookstore is. But it's going to give you that deeper level of understanding. But you've got to be intellectually curious and motivated to get through it, because it's not just going to be here's some pablum to read about prompt engineering or or whatever. So yeah, so like I said, weird sales pitch, right?
Well, for finance individuals, we just said that we're branching out of our normal process, and hey, as accountants and finance individuals, we like to learn, so it's a great opportunity, and I definitely am going to check it out as well. And Glenn, yeah, we just want to thank you for joining us today, and everyone else, don't forget to check in on all the good content that Glenn has outside of this podcast.